everybody. My name is Riccardo. I'm a director, producer, and a photographer. I'm here with Beverley Glick, and Beverly is a written and spoken word coach, and she's here today to have an espresso with me. So, Beverly, why don't you tell us a bit about yourself, who you are, and what you do?
Hi, Riccardo. Thank you very much for welcoming me into your parlour for having a cup of espresso. So I call myself a written and spoken word coach because it's the shortest way of describing the many things that I do. My background is in journalism. I've been a writer for nearly 40 years. So my journey started in the written word as a music journalist in the 80s. I became the editor of a pop magazine. I then in the 90s worked for a number of different national newspapers in different roles. And my journey in the spoken word didn't start till about 8 years ago when I trained to be a life coach. And as a result of that, I met this wonderful woman called Sarah Lloyd-Hughes, who was teaching public speaking in a new and fresh, authentic way. I attended her courses. I started attending to assist, and after about 6 months she invited me to join the training team. So that is how I am now a spoken word coach as well as a written word coach. So I train people in business how to get very clear on the message that they're sharing. I help them with storytelling and delivering TED style talks, but I also help authors come up with ideas for books. I help people write blogs. So there's a whole world of things within that title that I do.
Fantastic, Beverly. Thank you so much. And I can clearly see that you're very good with words. Much better than me. So I'm more like a visual person. But anyway, so we're here today because there's one subject that we're both very passionate about, and you just mentioned that, which is storytelling. So we've been talking in the last few weeks about these themes, and we just thought, why don't we grab an Italian espresso and we talk about storytelling. So I just wanted to pick your brain about that, and know what is storytelling for you? So what's a story, and what's your personal relationship with stories? Tell me more about that.
So thanks for that question, Rick, because I think that it's important to kind of go back to basics with storytelling. It's become a real buzzword in business now. Everyone talks about, you've got to be a great storyteller and everyone's got to tell stories. But I think we need to really look at what we mean by stories here, because everyone's got a different idea of what a story is. If you look up story in the dictionary, you're going to get lots of different definitions of what it is. And I think we need to kind of narrow it down a bit. So I found 3 definitions of story that I think work in a business context. And I'm going to share those with you now. See which one resonates with you the most. So the first one is a story is a problem approached in an interesting way that makes us care. That's number 1. Number 2, a story is a journey with a twist, taking us from one place to another place where change occurs. That's number 2. So number 3 is a plan is going from A to B via the quickest route. A story is A to B via the most interesting route. So I just wanted to put that out there to narrow the field of vision a bit around what exactly a story is. So I can tell you which my favourite of those 3 is. And that's the one in the middle. The story is a journey with a twist, takes us from one place to another place where change occurs. The essence of a story, Rick, is that it's about change. If it's not about change, it's not a story. So that's the distinction. So stories are about change and transformation. That's what we're looking at here.
That's very, very interesting. So yeah, I agree with you. I mean, it's such a topic. There's so many people talking about branding, personal branding, storytelling, and a lot of time when people talk about marketing, branding, advertising, there's one thing that a lot of time, people talk about, which is storytelling, the importance of storytelling. And I think, these days, especially authentic storytelling is quite an important subject. So I have another question for you, which is, why do we listen to stories? And how can we use also story for communicating to the rest of the world? So what do you think?
So it's the other thing to understand is that we are hardwired to make sense of the world in story form. We cannot not tell stories. We can't make sense of what's going on around us, what's going on inside us, unless we tell a story about it. It's how we communicate, it's how we think, it's how we understand the world. So we're storytelling animals, for a start. And there's been so much research done about the neuroscience of storytelling, and I could go into that. That's a whole rabbit hole you can go down if you want to. But essentially, because we're hardwired to understand stories, if I'm telling you a story, Rick, then you're going to be experiencing that story in your mind's eye, not just in one part of your brain, but lots of parts of your brain. So you're effectively going to be reliving the story as I tell it to you. So there's this remarkable connection and resonance that happens between me and you as a storyteller and a story listener. So it's a really powerful way of connecting with other people in a very immediate and emotional way. So I think stories can be used in any context. I mean, there are many different types of story. My personal favorite is the more personal, authentic story.
Which absolutely, I agree with you. I think there is a lot of need, for authentic type of storytelling, which is exactly why we're here, I think. So I think another thing that I wanted to ask you as well is what can we learn through stories? What can we learn?
Well, I think we learn through stories. So we learn through telling stories and listening to stories. I don't think there's any other way we can learn, because we find it very difficult as human beings to actually take on a lot of information if it's just facts and figures. So there was a famous study done in America that figured out that stories are 22 times more memorable than fact or figures alone. So we're much more likely to remember a story than a fact. So we learn by listening to stories. We learn by passing on stories. We've been doing that since we were sitting around the campfire before we could read or write. So all of that wisdom that was passed down over the centuries, it was all in the oral tradition. It was all spoken stories. That's how we pass down knowledge. So we've been learning from stories for many, many, many years. And I think it's still as relevant now as it ever was. I like to think of storytelling as the primal technology, which it's interesting that it's just as important now in the 21st century as it was before we could read or write.
Yeah, absolutely. That's very interesting. Yeah, so it's interesting because it's almost like going back in time when radio, books, and TV and cinema were not there, and social media and the internet didn't even exist. That's when people use stories around campfire. So that's incredible. So in a way, it hasn't really changed much. It's just the technology that it has changed, and I think that's very fascinating because it's and it's part of us as human animals, as you said before. We are storytelling animals, which is such a great concept, I think. Just to wrap up our very interesting conversation that we had. So the last year, obviously the whole world had changed. So many things change, and like a global narrative has changed as well. So I'm just wanted to ask you also, how do you feel our connection with stories have changed, if has changed in the last few months? And so how can we use stories in a more effective way can we use stories in a more effective way now during the pandemic? What do you think?
That's a really interesting question. And I think what's happened because of the lockdowns is that people have become a lot more reflective. Their worlds have become much smaller. They may be noticing more about what's going on inside them rather than outside them because everybody's been forced inwards. I think, yes, you're absolutely right. The narrative has shifted like in a way that nobody ever anticipated. Even at the end of the year 2019, I don't think anyone would have believed you if you told the story of what happened last year. So we've had to adapt to this massive shift in story, all of us. So perhaps it's because of that people have become more aware of the importance of the narrative of their lives. Because what I was noticing very early on in the first lockdown last year was how quickly our language was changing. And that was an indication of how quickly the story was changing. And I think it was extremely disorienting for a lot of people because they couldn't figure out where they were in the story. And I think people are still figuring that out and will still be figuring that out for quite a while because we're still in the story. We're still living through it. We don't know really what's going to happen next. We've just got this hope on the horizon that everything's going to go back to the way it was, but we don't know if it will. And people find it very difficult to deal with that uncertainty. And I think that's what stories help you with. You might want to return to a really comforting story that you heard as a child, or I think that's why people are watching their favorite programs from the 80s and 90s just to root themselves in that old story again, because it's comforting. It's stories are incredibly comforting, and they have been ever since we were children listening to stories. So I think it's a really fascinating topic that we could spend a long time talking about that, but I think it's really fascinating.
Thank you, Beverly. So that's absolutely so interesting what you just said, and so I mean, I can't wait to see what's going to happen in the next few months if our global story has changed or will change even more. But thank you for your time, Beverly, and I hope you enjoyed the coffee as well. How was the coffee? Was it good?
Well, I'll let you in on a little secret. I don't actually drink coffee, but I've got a lovely cup here, which it looks very nice. So I'll let you have my coffee.
Thank you so much, Beverly, and have a lovely day. Thank you, everybody. Bye. Bye-bye.